You're listening to the best of the bravest. Interviews with the FDNY's elite. And now for volume 70. It's been a couple weeks now of straight FDNY shows, and that's been great. It's been nice to get back into the best of the bravest, which is one of the backbones, as you know, of this program. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, on that note to episode 359 of the Mike the New Haven podcast, and what is a milestone volume for the best of the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite, because it's volume 70. And we started this series quite a number of years ago, almost 4, with Ray Seeley originally. And to see it take a life of its own, and like I said, become one of the true backbones of the program, I thank all of you, and I thank all of the guests, including tonight's guest. I'll introduce in a little bit, for the contributions to the miniseries over the years. It does not get anywhere if you don't have an audience, and Best of the Bravest has certainly become something very vital to the Mike New Haven podcast for the audience that it's built. And I appreciate every one of you for that. Just a quick shout out previously to the, of course, episode that preceded this one, which was volume 69, retired Chief of Department of the FDNY, John Sudnick. And that was a fun conversation with him. Got a lot of good feedback on that one. So thank you very much for those of you that tuned in. If you haven't checked it out, of course, make sure you do so. You know the drill by now. We're trying to get more sponsors here in the program. But the one guy I can say is who has been with us thick and thin, and I appreciate him because that's a true friend right there, is Billy Ryan, retired NYPD detective and head of the Ryan Investigative Group. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike the New Haven podcast. And just before I introduce the guest, I do want to send my condolences to Billy. He just lost his mom. So on behalf of myself and producer Victor and all of us here at the Mike the New Haven podcast, those of you, of course, in the audience as well, including in this, we send our love and our thoughts to Billy as he grieves his mom. So, you raised a heck of a man there, Mama Ryan, and we remember you on this program. Mother Peck has joined us here in the Mike the New Haven podcast. I heard that comment in the promo I put out on Facebook. My next guest is a retired FDNY paramedic whose career spans over 5 decades of saving lives in the street, and as well as teaching and preserving, as we'll talk about tonight, EMS history, from working in the gritty streets of 1970s New York City, as well as 80s and 90s New York City, to helping build the foundation for today's EMS training and operations. The story is definitely one of dedication, innovation, and a deep love for the profession. And it's a profession that gives a lot for as much as it may take. And we'll talk about that tonight. And that for this milestone, volume 70 of the Best of the Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite, Mother Peck himself, Mark Peck, finally joins me. We've been trying to do this for a while, Mark, so it's nice to finally have you.
Yeah, glad the schedule's finally worked out. Retirement is hard to schedule around.
Yeah, I always go back to something my friend Dan McNally, retired out of the NYPD Bomb Squad, said on this program a number of years ago on Tales from the Boom Room, our Bomb Squad miniseries, where he was like, retirement's a full-time gig. It's a hard thing to do. And he's right. He's right. From what I've heard, guys are busier in retirement than they were when they were actually on the job. So we'll talk about that tonight as well. So before we get into anything, of course, involving your career, first question is always, as you know from watching the show, where did you grow up? Where did it all begin, Mark?
Born in Bensonhurst, moved to Flatlands area where after my sister was born, parents needed a bigger house. And from there, when I got married, I went to Canarsie for a little while, and then we moved to Staten Island. So that's where I was until I left New York. Smaller house, and then we got the bigger house as the kids were coming.
Right.
So, and from retirement, here I am, Charlotte, North Carolina.
Good place to be. And what I've heard about is from a few friends that live down there that have retired and moved out of the Northeast, is that what's nice about Charlotte and the Carolinas in general is the climate is relatively reasonable all year round. Even in the wintertime, the winter's not that bad. Yeah.
I mean, it gets cold, but, you only have maybe one snow a season. I don't think we had any last year. Yeah. So I'm more than happy to put that away. But they panic when snow comes, let me tell you. The drivers have no concept of how to drive in it, and there's very little machinery to clear it. So.
Right. Well, because it's something they're relatively not used to and don't deal with a lot. We laugh of course, up
Yeah.
here in the Northeast. And I will laugh scornfully at you when I'm suffering through another New England winter and you're dealing with a relatively tame one, but that's neither here nor there. I forgive you in advance. So just tell me, by the way, for those of you in the chat, you know the drill by now. Fire away a question. We'll highlight it at the appropriate time if you got one. Tell me, where did the appetite for wanting to get into EMS or some form of civil service, even if you didn't know it was EMS right off the rip, where did that begin for you?
All right. Well, when I was a kid, I was interested in the fire service when I was, about yay tall.
Yeah.
And my grandfather in particular, used to take me to the local firehouse on Snyder Avenue. And I recently found a photo of me there. I think I was maybe 6 years old with one of the old helmets and a really antique vehicle. But, I kind of went away with that. My real goal as I was getting through high school was I wanted to become a veterinarian. I was working for a couple of local vets. I loved animals. And it just didn't work out. The college I chose was not the right one to give me the grades to get into Cornell by any means. But on the other hand, it did give me my future profession and it gave me my future wife, mostly due to my roommate. He comes in one day and he's going to talk to me. He was a member of the campus had its own ambulance corps for the campus. And he says, "Come, join the ambulance corps. It's a good way to meet girls." So sure enough, I went down there and that I did. The girl came knocking on the door for him, so I took her too. The strange thing that you may also find out, you guys know Gary Urbanowitz.
I've heard the name, yes.
Yeah, he was the director of the New York Fire Museum. He's got his own antique Chiefs car and stuff. Mm-hmm. He was one of the vice presidents at the time, and that's where I met him. So we've known each other for a very long time. So with that, I ended up joining the campus corps. I liked it, decided to take a leave of absence for college, took a short summer job for a commercial ambulance for like a month and a half, 2 months. And I decided to apply to New York City EMS. I decided I wasn't going back. I'm going to just take the year off and see where it takes me. And I got hired. They took me in as an MVO. I had already been an EMT, but the title wasn't recognized. And they were in the process of changing over at that point, building the corpsman program where they were cross-training the drivers and the ambulance techs. So because of that, I had no seniority, so they just couldn't recognize it for a while. And I ended up being an MVO. Started out in Gouverneur and did the whole tour of the city of the Bronx and Brooklyn and back and communications until the medic program came around. They sent out a notice one day that they were going to restart the medic program. Now, I had known the guys in the original class because one of my later assignments was up at Jacoby. So I got to see the pilot program. I got to know most of them, at least on a superficial level, and they knew my face. And one of the guys says, stick around. They're going to be starting it soon. And sure enough, he was right. So I ended up passing all the exams and got into the second paramedic program at Jacoby in 77.
Around that time, yep.
Yeah.
So we're talking with Mark Peck here on Volume 70, the best of the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. I'm going to jump into that for a moment. By the way, Dave Burns says hello as well. He crossed paths with you, I believe, for a time in EMS. But one of the things that I wanted to pass off is he messaged me. Kenny Bowen grew up on the same block as you.
Yes.
And he ended up becoming a sergeant, first a police officer, later a sergeant in the NYPD Emergency Service Unit. He's previously been on this program. So good to see you, Kenny. He wanted me to send his regards. So he sends his regards to you and remembers you well and remembers you being a good guy. So
yeah, we kind of reconnected here. So
yeah, very small world. I'm like, yeah, he messaged me on Facebook when I put the promo out for you. I'm like, wow, what do you know? What do you know? So kind of like I covered with Jerry Gombo a couple of weeks ago in that interview, although it was a quicker turnaround for him. You became a medic not long after, becoming an EMT. It was only a couple of years that went by from an EMT cert to a medic cert. So do you think, and this is kind of what I talked about with Jerry, you could dive into it here. Do you think getting certed so quickly as a medic, not too long that is after getting your EMT, helped you because the curriculum kind of rolled over?
I don't think it hurt me. I don't think it hurt me. I was still kind of fresh in a lot of it, but I wasn't experienced. I really wasn't at that point. But the good news of it was that I had the college prereqs, so that a lot of the preliminary stuff that you have to get to, stuff that I all knew. Between that and, believe it or not, between the animals, there was a lot of commonality in treating some of the diseases and some of the procedures. So
brought together pretty easily. So how long was it? I mean, now it's like a year and a half, but back then at Jacoby, how long was the curriculum for medic?
It was shorter for the first course than us. We only went, maybe, I think we started in August, and we graduated in December, which is when they sent us out. But we didn't have the formal graduation until January.
Wow.
So it wasn't all that long, but it was full time. The course, I'm sure, has really grown back and forth, over the years. So I don't know, but it was a good education. We had better teachers, because most of it was done by Dr. Jacobson.
Mm.
I mean, not to get on, our medics teachers now, but we were getting full-fledged medical courses in some of this stuff.
Right. By an actual doctor. So yeah, and again, that's, as you said, not a knock on any of the teachers that we have now. A lot of them were good. I had the good fortune to work with some of them. But yeah, back then, a bit of a different animal. So I think we have the picture of Medic 380 in the queue. I loaded it in to be able to put it up here tonight, because you sent me down a trip of as a history buff, memory lane. Granted, I never lived this in real time.
Okay.
But it's great to kind of see it through your eyes, and we have it here.
That one is actually the first unit at Coney Island. That was 385.
Yeah.
So that was about 6 months after we graduated. The next class came out, and we started the service at a number of other stations, Coney Island being one. So
originally, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I went from Kings County to there. Kings County, I only spent that 6 months at. Spent some time as a supervisor there later, but that's later in the story.
Yeah, I was gonna say originally, yeah, we were at Kings County for a little bit, and then not too long after that is when you made the transition over. One thing I wanted to touch on with you as well is you were talking about radio contact protocols. I mean, that's a bit of it's so huge now. I mean, communications is a whole chapter now. I remember when I was going through EMT school the second time in the fire academy, because the first time it's not the charm, but the second time was. There's a whole chapter dedicated to the usage of codes, usage of communications, when not to communicate even. So working on that back then, tell me about, because again, especially in New York City, you got to hop on the radio, but there's times where maybe you don't have to hop on the radio.
Well, I think your concern or your question about, at least when we got a little bit of talk together, was about use of protocols versus having to call in for every procedure. I mean, realistically, we only had a couple of years of the first class before we came out. MAC hadn't existed. The program there, the program at Beekman, they were all separate at that point, but they formed the MAC committee while our class was in, which started to coordinate everything. It started to pull together standing order protocols, which the Jacoby medics had to a degree, but it was a lot, they were in, I don't know, murkier water back then, but they were allowed to do a lot because they had the confidence of both the staff there, the nursing, and the physicians. So we ended up starting with a small book of standing order protocols, and once you got to, the basics being done, you would call in if you needed certain drugs. Some drugs were standing order, like for cardiac arrest, you could start, but as you got into it, they wanted you to call the doc at that point and get him involved. And it went that way, and it still remains that way, but the protocol book is now much thicker. They do a lot more. We treat a lot more conditions than we started with. We didn't even have pediatrics when we started. If you were a child, we had no ALS protocol for you. So the whole system grew, and we were one of the stepping stones in it.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the things that also came up too was med control, even for EMTs. I mean, at least in Connecticut, that is where I am. When to call med control versus when not to call med control, because you do have a standing order. Certain medications you can assist a patient with versus others where you're going to have to seek special permission from the hospital and the doctor's on standby. So, dealing with it back then, not to say that some form of it didn't exist previously, but I feel like around this time, and correct me if I'm wrong, it started to become a little bit more formalized. The basis of it at least was there. And as you said, it grew as the years progressed.
Having EMTs starting to call in only began with high risk refusals for a while, possibly situations where they have a dispute with either an EMT on the scene or a physician on the scene, like the patient's physician is on the scene, problems call up. So they didn't really get into that until a number of years after us. And now, they've got a number of other things, but they also have standing orders for, the EpiPen, the albuterol. Right. I know they've extended even after I left, they're doing things. I mean, they didn't have defibrillators in the early years of the program. The AEDs came out. I think Hatzola was the first to have them, and Gerritsen Beach got an early model of it, and they didn't work all that well, but it put us on the path of them finally building quality equipment that really does make it worth the money.
Absolutely. And you look at some of the stuff that ambulance is carrying now. I mean, even some of the engines, we're focusing specifically on EMS. It's basically a hospital on wheels, especially if it's functioning at an ALS level, which most ambulances are. It's incredible to see. And one of the things I want to touch on too is being a preceptor. It's not, it's not an easy job because you're thinking about what you want to do as a medic, but you have to watch this. It's kind of like a baby bird, right? You got to watch them gain their wings in real time. And I'm sure you had some students that it was a struggle, but you had some students that really blossomed. So, I mean, again, you had a passion for teaching. I mentioned it in my introduction. What was it about not just learning this for yourself, but wanting to teach others that really appealed to you?
Well, I kind of got into this out of necessity. One of the other things that I got involved with when I was still in MVO was Flatlands Volunteer Ambulance Corps. They were just forming, and I kind of got in at the ground level. I ended up being their first training director, and I had to start teaching CPR and operational program stuff when they finally got on the road and were approved to go out and start service. So I kind of had that under the belt. So with CPR, that was good. I ended up getting involved with Coney Island Hospital. Dr. Sultani and the ER was doing the ACLS, the Advanced Cardiac Life Support stuff. So he got me involved, and I ended up becoming an ACLS instructor as well. And I was teaching there for a while. So all these little bits and pieces, and then the expansion of the medic program, it just fell naturally into place. With each new class that was graduating from like Jacoby 1 through Jacoby 12 or so, Jacoby 11, they were doing expansion. They would start adding new units on, start new hospitals that they're basing out of. So what I basically got, most of the older guys got, was there were three men in a schedule for a shift. 2 of you were working, 1 of you was off. Well, they ended up taking one of those 3 spots and making it reserved for a new graduate. So for a number of years, you always had your one partner, and then the 2 of you had a student. So, half the week you would work with someone new and you would teach them. And I enjoyed it. I really did. I ended up working with so many people that I didn't know as medic students, even when they were in class, that later on in life, they reminded me, yeah, I was your student. And I'm going, I didn't even know you then. You were with me for a week or for the 6-month period, if they were lucky. Though those, of course, I obviously knew. But I got to meet a lot of people, and I ended up being good at that. I was never a good lecturer. That's the one thing I found. I also got into being a practical instructor out at the academy for a little while, and I stayed with that until I think we moved out to Staten Island, and the commute just became too much. You get to see yourself in these people. You get to see your values in people that you teach, and that's kind of the way I looked at it. And it's worked. And like I say, a lot of people thanked me when I retired for that introduction. And I got to meet a lot of really great folk.
Well, it sounds like it, as we'll talk about tonight. And, it plays into one of the other questions I was going to ask you before I get to that, of course. Mitch Stern's watching. We were talking about him off air. Mitch, my phone number is in the description of this episode. So give me a call when you can, because I want you to come on the show as well. It says you were the best partner that he ever had. Steve Kerr's also watching, as we knew he'd be in the chat. So good to see you, as always, my friend, of course, a previous guest of the show. And there's a story that Mitch put in there, because there was a question we had in the chat. It's a good one from Banana Tree Gamer. about violence against EMTs back then. He lives in England, or she, and it always seems to be an issue. And to which then Mitch added that you guys had a fridge thrown down a stairwell at you guys?
I don't think that was us.
Yeah.
It may have been him. He may have been working with someone else. I don't think I've had a fridge. I've had other things.
Because Mark and I had a refrigerator thrown down the stairwell in the pit. That's what he put in the chat. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, we used to see airmail coming off the housing projects. They would used to try and bomb people coming into the entrance. Yeah. Had TV come down with that one day. I don't remember the refrigerator though. Sorry, Mitch.
Can't imagine.
Might have been Davin.
Yeah, I can't imagine something like that coming down at me down a staircase. I mean, a fridge, I don't know. I don't know. But people have some real rage issues out there. Steve Kerr also adds in the chat, Medic 32 X-ray, because he mentioned earlier he was Jacoby 11. Medic 32 X-ray was added in that time period. I worked midnights, covered Bensonhurst and Bay Ridge. To your point on that. Mark Peck, of course, especially, yes, as producer Victor notes in the chat, if it's a full fridge. Mark Peck's our guest here on the Mike to David podcast for episode 359. This is the Best of the Bravest, milestone volume 70. So you mentioned, I like what you said at the end there. You saw a lot of yourself, the people you were teaching, because you saw, it's worth noting, you saw the rotations kind of from start to finish, not just in the field and the rotations there and getting patient touches, but in the emergency room as well.
Yeah, we used to go in when they were doing their ER time, and they would assign one of the seasoned medics. And the fact, again, that it was Coney Island worked out ideally for so many people because we had a great relationship with the nurses and the physicians there. So they, anything that we needed, we basically could find. You need to see something? All right, we'll find a doc for you who can explain it. I loved it. I really did.
Well, it sounds like it. Listen, it was a great gig for you, and something that, even all these years later, you're still speaking fondly of. So, I mean, I do want to talk about this too, because there was a brief chapter in your career, and it takes a lot of guts to do something like this. You made lieutenant in 1984. You had the rank for 6 months, New York City EMS lieutenant, that is. Had the rank for 6 months, but resigned it after those 6 months because, you really wanted to stay out in the field, and I guess it was more of an administrative job. So, I mean, testing for it, getting it is big, but sometimes you move up the ladder because of what other people think maybe you want to stay there. But no, I mean, listen, you knew where your heart was, and you made a leap of faith that worked out. So just take me through first passing the test and what ultimately made you realize, you know what, this isn't for me.
Originally, there was no civil service test for lieutenant, and that began very, very late in the 70s. Maybe early 80s, somewhere in there. And I had no, no desire. There were a couple of lieutenants that I liked, but I never saw that as my function. I loved patient care. I loved working with new medics. I loved having a partner. When I ended up taking the promotion, it was after I had deferred it probably about 4 or 5 times. And it wasn't until Robert Becker finally said, "You've got to do this for me," that he convinced me to go and try it. And I ended up being on a split shift at Kings County, and it was a miserable shift. You can't get any kind of time clock in your head for when you sleep and when do you get up. The commute to Brooklyn, to Kings County, was a lot rougher than getting into Coney Island. But I ended up trying it, and finally I just got fed up one afternoon. I was stuck on a Sunday and mandated to do the week's overtime reports. And I finally said, I've had enough of this shit. And I resigned. And I said, I'm going back. Went back to Coney Island, and I have not regretted it a day since. Supervisors are much more physical now, much more using their knowledge and their skills now than it was back then. There was no field patrol back then. Now at least you go out, you interact with a crew, you see how they're doing, you see if there's a problem, you stand up for them when there is a problem. That wasn't then. That wasn't what you had. It was just look at the papers and sign. So, yeah, like I say, I don't regret it a bit. And,
I don't blame you.
Yeah. And I think the other part of it also was the money wasn't there back then. I was on top medic salary, so I was making as much as a starting captain at that point. So I wasn't going to see a pay raise of any, size for at least 5 years. So what do why am I going to do this?
Yeah. there's no incentive there. And I've heard a lot about that too. When you go up in rank, it's either
Yeah.
a minimal pay raise or it's actually a pay cut. So I'm like, yeah, it's kind of not
Well,
sensible to me.
they can't do a pay cut. They have to give you a minimum increase, which was
Yeah.
for me $500.
Yeah.
$500 for this? Nah, not worth it.
No, not at all. I mean, now, I know supervisors tend to have their own cars, like you said. I mean, cars for the field, that is. They're out in the field. They're able to be a little bit more involved and not as much in the office. But back then, it was a different concept. And if you're not doing what you love to do, and obviously you're still in the position where mentally and physically you still can do it, why take the job ultimately? I mean, it's one thing if you're at the end of your career and you kind of have that gut feel, as some guys do. We're not knocking them. Hey, you know what? I think I got to get out of the field and get into the office. That wasn't your case.
Well, I'll tell you, one other difference that you see now versus then is supervisors are much better trained and experienced in MCIs.
Yeah.
Right? Things like that were, you had a second alarm fire every night in the Bronx when I was working up there. The second alarm fire, you really didn't see much in the way of, patients unless something went really, really bad. Nothing of that I ever got to. I managed to miss all the big ones by 15 minutes. It was uncanny. My unit has gone 3 times to big events right after I got off duty. So, hey, this is what it is. So the supervisors have a lot more responsibility now, and they benefit the crews a lot more with that experience, I think.
Absolutely. And Steve Kerr brought this up when he was on a couple of years ago, that you think of an MCI, you kind of think of, unfortunately, like something like that, what happened a couple of weeks ago in Midtown Manhattan, that yes, that is an MCI, but a fire in which you have multiple people injured, or even car accident, 2 cars collide, there's 3 passengers in one car, 2 in the other, you got 5 injuries, that's an MCI. So there's a lot that meets the criteria that, guys are, especially even now, even if fire duty's down, there's so many things that happen. Your MBAs, your shootings, your stabbings, especially in a large city like New York. Even in years where crime was down, there's enough of it to go around. You're going to get your hands dirty. You're going to get that experience one way or another.
New York expanded because of all of those issues. And I'm sure, Steve will tell you a lot more about it. But the implementation of SOD, I think, was a major benefit, long overdue, because now you had people that are well-versed coming on as these disasters are getting out. Maybe later on we'll get to the point where I was working in Charlotte, which I did after I retired. When you look at an MCI out here, you've got to cringe, because if it's a big one, you have a lot of time until you start to see, any number of units coming in, particularly if you're in the surrounding counties with an MCI. We've gotten dispatched to a number of times. Just to make it clear to those who don't know, after I left New York, I went to work in Charlotte, North Carolina for about 10 years. So, it's a lot harder. Even a big collision, you've got to wait for units to come from across the city to come and staff all of this. And they worked out a lot, but it's not as well choreographed as it is in New York.
No, not at all. Again, night and day. And day. Eric Stone adds in the chat, he sends his regards. He says, "Hi, Mark. Hope all is well. Mark was partnered with my father after he graduated the Jacoby Medic 10 class at Coney Island Hospital in the mid-'80s. So he sends us
Dave was one of my best partners. Shame what happened to him.
So that brings us into 1985 and dignitary protection, because I mentioned this with Chief Gombo, that Bob Becker and Zach Goldfarb and Steve Kerr were really, really thinking ahead of the curve back then in terms of trying to bring EMS out of the dark ages. Because as I covered before with guys who worked New York City EMS and either went on to the FD or went on to the PD in some cases, that it was an agency that did a lot with a little back then. And the unfortunate thing with EMS is it's always been treated as the bastard stepchild, if you will. Never was that more evident in the 70s and 80s, but things are starting to change. Becker's thinking forward, so is Goldfarb and Kerr and a few other people. Dignitary protection comes up. Not that it was invented then, but nevertheless, it's an interesting concept. UN visits, presidential visits, anybody significant, a celebrity. You got to be a part of that. How did that come to be?
We actually just ended up being an expansion. It was already, the theory of it was already in place. The Jacoby 1 medics were the DPU detail. Whenever the president would come in, they would pull one of the medics and use that for the motorcade, because before that, I don't even know. I'm sure that they had city ambulances involved, but I don't even know if there was anything organized back then. So, Medic 1 and Medic 2 up in the Bronx were the DPU detail. And they would take an extra set of equipment and off they would go. When our class graduated, they began to put us into the program. So I think I started when Carter was president. Who came first? Reagan. Reagan came first, then Carter.
Carter, then Reagan.
Carter first. No, yeah, Carter did come first. So I ended up doing that, and that's where they formalized it, where we would go down with the Secret Service for training, and they recruited as many of us as they could. So the idea of being, one of us or a couple of us will be off, and we'll take the detail. And that just blossomed with each new class that came out. Every couple of months they would run a new program, and people would join up. But it was good because, number one, you knew you got vetted medics and experienced medics for it. But you also had people that became familiar with the motorcade procedures as well. We had a similar detail. The fire always assigned people to do the venues that they go to, the hotel that he stays in. There are people that are detailed for the motorcade itself, for the arriving hospital. It just expanded. And they do that in every city now. So I think it gives them the greatest amount of protection.
Absolutely. Because it's good coordination. Because, there's many units involved in this. I remember reading a book on the NYPD Emergency Service Unit that Sam Katz wrote in the mid-'90s, and it talked about ESU's role, but also EMS's role. If somebody goes down, you guys are right there with them. Now, granted, obviously, there's a little bit more protection with them involved in the concept, but that immediate care is the name of the game. Now, tell me, what are the more notable details, if any, that stand out, or people that you got to cross paths with through that detail?
Oh, I got to work with a lot of people who were seniors, so it was always a good experience. I don't know, who did I get to know? I don't really think I became close with anyone that I didn't already know through most of that. Even through the training, we ended up doing a drill one day out on Governor's Island, which was probably the first time that we ever did a simulated attack scenario complete with explosives, which was kind of interesting. But that put a number of us together for the practice, and not much else to tell about that.
Any notable, celebrities or historical figures that you got to meet through that detail, or not really?
Not really. We were always, especially in the beginning, it was very low key. You didn't even go up and shake the president's hand. They would usually come out to you at the airport or something, go down the line, and if you stood in the line, you get a handshake. But no, on those details, we were at the bottom rung of the city people. Even as far as the hotels that we were staged in, like we were up at the Waldorf Astoria, and there would be a room for police and for fire, and most of them would camp out and claim the bed, claim the couch, and we got what was left. We were sitting on the floor waiting in case anything happened while he was in the hotel. So
there you go.
Yeah.
In theory, if the president goes down, the first people that are getting to him is the Secret Service. If you're the medic, even if you're the assigned medic or EMT to him, or you're probably not going to get there. And that's not out of a lack of care. It's just there's so many people that are going to converge. You won't even get the chance. You won't get within 100 yards of them.
Well, at some point you will. It all depends where they are. Obviously, their first interest is getting him into a secure area.
Right.
And we actually got called for to respond out of the room one day. At the Waldorf, it was shortly after George Bush's incident where he passed out. So when this thing came, it's like, oh no, this is real. But it ended up being one of the high-end people attending who passed out. So they called us down anyway. We did the initial survey, and then they got a regular ambulance to come in and transport. So, but that was the way the system was supposed to work, because our primary was just to be there for, the dignitaries themselves.
Absolutely. Another again, it's a reunion. Like I said, off the air and on the air, it's a New York City EMS reunion tonight because Bill Gross is in the chat and he'll be
Oh
on the
yeah.
show next month. And he sends his regards. So good to see you, my friend. Look forward to our chat coming up in early September. Now, just as important as sending these ambulances out on the road is making sure they have what they need. But it can be a pain in the neck. But nevertheless, it's kind of like that old line from the Faith No More song. We care a lot. It's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it. And what I'm talking about is getting the ALS supplies from the ambulance. Now, depending on where you are, sometimes it can be a pain in the neck to haggle. Other places it's a little bit easier. But as far as dictating, okay, here's what the bus needs, here's how much of it needs, what was that process like for you?
In the beginning, it just basically started with us trying to figure out what do we use in a protocol. There were some rough guidelines that the administration sent down, and we ended up building on that. Each unit kind of set their drug box up a little bit differently. Some people started doing shortcuts of not taking all of their medications in on low priority, or what they perceived as low priority calls, because you'd have to walk up, 6 or 7 flights. And that became a problem for a number of people who got caught short. So we finally ended up getting standardized inventory lists of that. Supply for us in the beginning was through the hospitals that we were at. So Coney Island, we would get all of our drugs through, and they were very generous. We had a great medical director, Dr. Sultani, and a great liaison with nursing and with Central Supply. So we ended up getting some things that made the job easier, like things to secure the IVs instead of tape. We would get drugs in certain forms and pre-filled that other people weren't getting. At one point, we were actually doing trades with Bellevue. I got this, you got that. And ultimately, that system, it just became too big and had no controls over the medications. So we ended up being supplied directly from Maspeth. They developed a pharmacy at Goldwater Hospital, and we had people that came around and did the medication routing and all the medication inventory through that system. But I ended up, each station kind of had one person that coordinated care of all of that stuff, keeping track of it. If we needed something, we had to put in a supplier requisition. And that was me for a lot of years. What we never did without. We always kind of got the better end of the deal with that. So,
as you should have. I mean, you're the ones that are going to be out there in the field dealing with it. And then again, as I covered before with veteran guys from EMS, are you the only ambulance corps in the city? No, different hospitals have their own ambulance corps. You see them all the time. Lenox Hill, Mount Sinai, New York Presbyterian, Montefiore. So, but then again, listen, everybody needs it to a fair degree. And I'm laughing at the trade system. You see now these trades in sports. Yeah, we sent this player for cash and a player to be named later. I'm just imagining something similar going on with ALS supplies back then.
Well, one of the good things that the system did for us is that they started to, I just had a thought, it slipped me. We started getting more involved with the equipment that EMS was actually purchasing. Instead of them choosing the drug box, which was in the beginning based off of the first class, we did something. They started getting into customization. So we finally started having our drug bags, airway bags, custom designed. And I got in on a lot of that in the beginning on field testing this, critiquing what was good about it, what was bad about it, even when it was still in the pre-order stage. And that ended up getting us a lot of stuff that was definitely a lot more functional, lighter. They started with the soft packs back then. Didn't really like them for certain reasons, but you compare them to what they have now, and there's a whole generation of medics out there that are getting commercial packs where the companies are finally putting the research into it, and the city is still going to customize their basic product. So that was something that was not happening in the beginning, and I think there's a lot of people that will thank the people that came before them for getting them on that track.
Absolutely. Mark Peck's our guest here, and this is volume 70 of the Best and Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. Looking at the chat again, and there's a lot of the chat is active tonight, which I appreciate. Mitch Stern again. Was it you with the Bay Ridge $1 Million Bearer band or bond?
Yes, that was me.
What's the story here?
We had a shooting out in Bensonhurst. I think that was one in a gas station, if I remember right. And it was an older Italian gentleman who was our patient. But there was a lot of people from the neighborhood around the scene. And as we started to transport, I had a couple of guys that, were not taking no for an answer. This guy was in critical condition. We can't take a rider on this. I'm sorry. Finally ended up having to have the cops pull this one guy out who was not taking no as politely as most families do under the circumstances. So we transported him to Coney Island. I think this was from the pre-trauma center days. So he did go into Coney. And I'm outside cleaning up. Mitch is inside doing the paperwork. And I find what looked like one of the police leather shield cases on the floor. It was one of those folded with a little snap on it, and I figured it was a badge. So I opened it up and I said, no, this is not a badge. All right. I bring it inside. I figure it's got to come off the patient. So I think I gave it to one of the cops who was there, because obviously you couldn't just leave something like that around. It had to be accounted for. And I found out as we were starting to clean the ambulance that this one guy was at the hospital, and now they were getting really upset. Where is it? Where is it? Well, the thing was opened up, and it had a bearer bond for like $1 million inside. He wasn't concerned about the patient. He was concerned about finding this. So, yeah, I had $1 million bond in my hand. Go figure.
And this was...
But these are not guys that you wanted to mess with.
No.
We were lucky that we never really had any bad blood or issues with any of those that were participating in the rumored criminal family.
Yes, and in a certain Italian American subculture, Mitch Stern adds, was it Ralph Spiro who was shot? That's the name I'm seeing in the chat.
I don't know the name.
No, because as soon as you mentioned Italian neighborhood and older man, that's where my first. I'm like, yeah, I have an idea as to where this is going. Sure enough.
I mean, we've had our fill of people that were the recipient of the bullet. Unfortunately, I had one up on Kings Highway that was kind of memorable because his foot got stuck on the accelerator of the car, and he was just burning rubber in place. But that's another story for further on.
Yeah, we'll get into that one later on.
Yeah.
Steve Kerr adds to one of the topics we were talking about previously, and the chat, again, is carrying the program tonight. We also had equipment that today's medics know nothing about. Masked trousers were a valuable tool for penetrating trauma, going back to what we were talking about earlier about ALS supplies. So there was that. And in light of MCIs as well, or you wanted to add something before we continue?
No, I'm good.
Okay. In light of what we were talking about earlier about MCIs, I did want to ask you this. So you get a series of them in the early 90s for different reasons. 91, the train derailment underneath, or the operator had one too many to drink. 93, the Trade Center bombing. Even in 92, when there was a lot of flooding, and people were stuck and injured during the floods of December, I believe, of 92. So there's a lot that's happening. Train derailment again above ground in Williamsburg in 95. So as far as the MCI initiatives back then, how much involvement did you have in rewriting anything back then, or just training people how to deal with certain scenarios since these were happening?
I think Steve probably ended up doing more than I did. Through most of my career, I was rather lucky. Like I say, I was usually 15 minutes too soon or too late for the unit that went. When I was BLS, they had the plane that went down on Rockaway Boulevard. My unit went 15 minutes after I left the station. For the wall bounce fire, it was my day off. And that's just the way it kind of ran. So I did not get to see very many of those. I mean, we've had a lot of smaller stuff, with collisions and pin jobs and stuff, but I've managed to miss most of the big ones, and it's not because I wanted to, but the trade center was, you volunteered, and that's the only reason that we went. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Speaking of volunteers, you were a founding member of the Flatlands Volunteer Ambulance Corps, and you helped write some of their procedures as well. Now, I imagine this is a cool point in your career because you get to really see something from the ground up, and on top of that, you'd had a lot of experience to this point, so you know what works and what you want to implement. But you also know, and this is where the beauty of the freedom comes in and how to write these procedures, what doesn't work. So with that in mind, what was the general criteria that you wanted to establish? Here's how we'll do things, and here's what I know has been recommended, but I found in my experience does not work, so we'll refrain from this.
I was in on the very bottom level. All right. I was there when they finally went into service. But I don't think I did probably more than maybe 10 shifts. And this was before the Corps was known, so people were not calling at that point. But the thing that I started with, we had our own operating guard for EMS. I started looking at that and looking at, well, what do they need? What will work for them? But everyone else pretty much was inexperienced. Flatlands ended up turning into a good training ground to recruit people to EMS. There's a lot of people that followed after that. So they used their experience there to get in, but they had patient contact at that point. This was after the new ambulances and stuff arrived and people with the community was calling them. We were just really introducing the concept to them. I don't know, there's not much else. The things that I did try and emphasize, and this was where I kind of met the, but I'm just a volunteer attitude. And that was problematic back then. But that slowly went away as they would start to have more contact with doing calls and more contact with interacting with Coney Island units as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's tough because there are those that want to be in it just for the sake of the uniform. How cool they look in the uniform. And this is any profession, fire department, police, EMS. And then there are those that are in it because they really, really love it. So you find your diamonds in the rough. But then again, it is frustrating when you meet that attitude. It's like, well, then why are you here? What's the point?
I mean, when it's new, they don't have that experience of now having calls and having done things that make them feel better, things that made them want to study and bone up on things, change protocols, do something differently. We were teaching ambulance 101 back then, and that was it. And unfortunately, the people that came in, some of them were really good. And like I say, others were, I'm just here to volunteer for 3 hours a week. And I'm not going I don't have to train this hard. And that was a hard thing to overcome. And I think they finally did, thank God, because the people that were coming out in the later years were definitely worthwhile people to take in. And we benefited as we did from a lot of the volley corps around the city of their alumni.
And the calls for service demand it. You don't have the luxury when you're walking in to report of priority 1 chest pain, or you got a diff breather, or you got anybody who's unconscious for a variety of reasons, unresponsive. Look at me using big EMT terms. The ink is still not even triad on my cert. But nevertheless, the point still stands. You don't have the luxury to say, I'm just a volunteer. No, even if you're not actively involved in the call. I for example, I volunteer for the West Haven Fire Department. One of the things I like doing, one of the things that one of my lieutenants encourages me to do is, even if you're not actively involved in the call, watch, learn, because there's going to come a time where you are, and you're going to be maybe even the lead on the call. What are you going to do? So that attitude can't last.
One of the nice entry points early in the program of the paramedics when we started coming out was we were now becoming a resource available to the volunteer ambulances, because none of them had paramedics. Hatsola didn't have medics. We used to do a lot of runs with Hatsola in Coney Island and Seagate. We started to get introduced to them a little bit when I was at Kings County, but they still weren't at the point of being accepting up there. And that's changed a lot. They started running their own paramedic programs, so taking people that are graduates of the new medic programs around the city. So that's all expanded out. But they learned how to work as a unit and what ALS could do and why it benefits their patients to call us. Because we had a lot of saves with a lot of those volunteer ambulance corps. It wasn't just our own people.
Right. I mean, you can get good calls with both, but I do want to ask you this, and it may seem like a silly question on his face as a medic. Did you prefer working ALS normally, or did you have a preference for BLS, or did it not matter?
I loved working ALS. There was just so much more I felt that I could do for people.
Yeah.
Even in the medic years, we normally didn't do BLS assignments unless, very early, if you were an extra medic and they didn't have someone to pair you up with out in another borough, they would put you on a BLS truck. The only thing I ever really looked for was the beach unit. Back then, we had the Cushmans doing the summer detail, and they would allow medics to do that if there were no EMT volunteers. So every once in a while, I got to do that, and it was nice because we could we didn't have defibrillators back then, but we could take our life pack with us, and we could take our airway kit. So if you did get something, the protocol allowed us to intubate. It allowed us to defibrillate before our own EMTs, had that awareness of equipment. So, Coney Island in the summer, definitely worth a trip.
Yeah, no, definitely. It was worth it back then, especially during the heat waves. I remember watching the story, and again, it's great to see these throwbacks. 1993, there was a particularly bad heat wave in New York City where you see people, and again, there's one guy sprawled out on the beach, hot as can be. What's he doing to cool himself down? Drinking a beer. So again, it kept you guys busy, allowed you guys to see a lot of cool things, enjoy nice weather in the city. So yeah, if I could be a fly on the wall and go back in time, I'd love to go back to something like that and witness that if time machines were real. One thing I did want to ask you about too, getting to 1996, is the ball game changes, right? You'd been independent from the FDNY. It's been talked about for years. You've been under Health and Hospitals Corps. But in the spring of 96, Commissioner Safer, right before he leaves to become the police commissioner, one of his final acts as fire commissioner is to see this merger through. So now you're under the banner of Big Brother. There was rumors the NYPD may take it. FDNY ultimately got it. So changing over, procedurally, and the ambulance are still doing a lot of the same stuff, but what was different for you, and what was the most glaring change 96, 97 you had to adapt to?
Most of us were not in favor of that merger. We figured if we had to go, we had much more in common with emergency service, because the fire department didn't run much in the way of EMS calls. They were at the very beginning of the CFR program, and a lot of them did not take it seriously. They didn't like doing the calls. I remember it was also somewhere close to the time when there was some merging of our people going over to them as recruits. So we had stories of people who were EMTs or medics being assigned to the shift as the designated CFR person for the day. You take care of that ambulance shit and we'll take care of you. You don't have to do the floors. That wasn't the way you go into a program. It took a long time before it really started getting better, and thankfully it did. The CFR program had its own tripping points, I guess, where some of the crews got in trouble for not doing the right thing. We were lucky. Most of the stations, let me change that. All of the stations that I dealt with in the Coney Island Sheep, very accommodating to us. We never had a problem with them, never had an argument with them. I had one guy say, you're a little bit different than some of the guys that are out on the street. You don't take advantage of us. You call us off and cancel us when you don't need us. What can we do for you? And that's the way that the attitude developed through my entire career. Because again, later in Charlotte, the fire department was not only our BLS backup, but they were our first responders. They're the only ones we were getting. So if you had a critical patient, you were taking a couple of firemen with you to assist on the transport. But the program, everything started really getting better with time. I don't know. What else can I tell you about it? Up to the point once the merger started, I mean, we were into it. There was no backing out. One funny story that I do tell was when we were very new. We always did a lot of patients who were elderly and having neighbors dealing with them in the Coney Island area. We went to one woman and we had the new uniform. I think it was the temporary uniform on. They hadn't gone to the full blues yet. And she goes to me at the end of the call, "You people are so much nicer than those people in the green uniforms. I'm so glad the fire department has gotten you over." And we looked at each other and we just didn't say a word, But that's what it was. It was a learning curve for the public as well, what they have today and what they had in my later years is a life changing event from where we started with it, but it was growing pains.
Of course, 1996 to 1997 with Chief Nigro originally at the helm of it for that first year before he transitioned to somebody else. Again, the joke back then, EMS stood for every minute sucks. But you know what? Listen, like you said, there's going to be growing pains with it. It's hard to believe that next year, because this is something that's been talked about a lot on the program, is the same thing with the merger of the 3 police departments the year before, in 1995. It'll be 30 years next year since that merger took place. Now, there's a lot of debate about if it was good or if it wasn't good. There's a lot of pros and cons, naturally, with anything. I think ultimately, looking back almost 3 decades later, more good than bad. And I think it's fitting. It's underneath the FDNY banner.
Well, I mean, the major benefits of that were mainly the budget. HHC did not have the budget for vehicles.
I don't know.
Fire didn't have it that well in the early year either, but it was nice. I think we finally started to see brand new ambulances coming in at about the 2-year mark. The selection process for them was pretty much still the same, but what they could spend was definitely better. Equipment-wise, we did better. Training-wise, people started to merge at the 2-year mark or so. On-scene interactions was better. MCIs was unquestionably better. Your coordination with them at the command post, what you do as far as patients inside vehicles inside structures changed radically, where they now have crews that are competent to go into buildings under limited circumstances. We used to tell them, you got somebody trapped up on the 5th floor of a fire. If that fire is still going on up there, you got to bring them down. We can't go inside. I had one fire crew on an overturn. I was stuck inside the vehicle. We managed to get the patient out, and I'm going, take him to that ambulance over there. And they took him to the wrong one that already had a patient in. Little stuff like that. But yeah, the relationship is radically different. Stations probably were another big learning curve. What they tried to do with us in the beginning with the battalion-based dispatching was a total disaster. Having 4 units sit on a street corner in a fake station that we're going to build one day. That did not work well at all. And it took that to fail before they finally started, doing what they did of taking over abandoned firehouses, building totally new facilities. There were a couple of mixed facilities. I think there's 2 of them or 3 of them in the station, in the city. Staten Island was one of them. That ended up being a little bit of a problem to some of the people I heard, but it started to build a relationship between us and them. And it's so different now than it was when we started. So
that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And naturally, it's going to come a long way with time. Like you said, the funding's better. Bill Gross mentions he'll talk about it, behind the scene merger plans when he comes on. I look forward to that because I really want a definitive look at that. Commissioner Safer painted a good picture, but I look forward to your perspective as well, Bill. Yeah. And I see it now. I mean, listen, I've said this before, there's still certain departments, without naming them, I'm not knocking them, but there's still certain fire departments that do not do, at least in the state of Connecticut, any EMS. But it's rare, because I've said this on the program many times and talking about it on the Best of the Bravest. EMS, for as much as some guys hate doing it, saved the fire service. When fire duty went down after the war years, again, I'm not saying there still weren't other emergencies like car accidents or anything like that the fire department had to respond to, but incorporating EMS reminded people, in my estimation at least, of the value of the fire service and having people not only trained to put fires out, but also trained as medics and EMTs to respond to the most common calls there are, even in cities that get a lot of fires like New York, which is these days EMS.
Around the nation, I mean, emergency was the start of planting the idea in their head, and the first LA County program and the programs that were going on in Pittsburgh and things. But you have departments now realizing that they have a responsibility. How you attack that is different in a lot of places. LA still has their squads doing the medic, but they're turning it over to a second medic in a private or a commercial ambulance that's in this system. Here, we managed to learn the hard way that you ended up wanting to keep EMS as a somewhat separate function because of the call volume alone. You can't go and do 3,000 calls a day with a firehouse doing all the runs. I think that accommodated a lot of the changes that they built into the system. The merger also started to bring us members on the fire side who were former EMS members, who were, who would interact with, who knew what we were doing. And when they get back to the firehouse, they talk differently and they're listened to differently than if we did it sometimes.
There's good and there's like I said, good and there's bad with everything. But I like that you brought that up too, because there's a lot of guys and gals that some just want to do EMS, and hey, no problem with that. If you don't want to do fire, you don't have to do fire. That's fine. But there are some people that want to eventually make the jump over. FDNY EMS, for some people look at this negatively. I don't. It's a stepping stone job now. It's generally viewed, if you want to get into the New York City Fire Department, it's generally viewed as a stepping stone job, an opportunity to cut your teeth on the street, learn how to work calls first, and then eventually, hopefully, if you get called, go to the FDNY as a firefighter.
The system that resulted, unfortunately, brought both the good and the bad. If they had started moving away from using us as a recruiting tool and as a staffing method, with a number of our senior people going over there each year, and if they had left it the old way, where we would lose maybe 10 people a year to fire, to police, that was fine, because I know a lot of people had that passion. They wanted the ultimate job, and they only took EMS as like the learning curve to get into a little bit. But I mean, now you've got wholesale stealing of all of our seasoned people, and that's bad, right? It disturbs me a lot when you no longer have anyone with more than 5 years of seniority in the system, because you're never being able to teach the new generation anything worthwhile. You don't have it down at the 5-year mark, and then you're gone. So that has to change. It really does.
There's a problem too, a little bit with the PD and the FD, kind of a different ballgame. But when people want to go from PD to FD, it wasn't until because you kept the same pay grade that you were at a PD when you lateraled over. It wasn't until they changed that guys, you didn't see as much laterals from PD to FD. So maybe it's, I don't know, maybe something similar incorporated into EMS. I know that's come up between both unions. So we'll see where that goes. Dave Anilowski, who is good to see in the chat, my friend. Dave Anilowski, for those of you in the audience, is one of my colleagues at the West Haven Fire Department. He's a firefighter paramedic. And you and I got to do a shift together, buddy, at 5s one of these days. He's asking me at Facebook, good to see you, my friend. He says, Mike, I got to know, does Mark have a favorite EMS movie or TV show? How impactful was Bringing Out the Dead for EMS in New York City? Thanks for the question.
I'm going to tell you this, and I'm going to be totally honest. I have been very, very disappointed with most of the movies about us that have been produced. One of my son is in the film business, and as he was going through the master's program at University of Southern California, and we were paying for a part of it, the promise that he made to me was that he was going to finally produce something that I'm going to be proud of. Now, don't get me wrong. I love Mother Jugs and Speed. Obviously, my nickname came off of that because we had a threesome that was Mother Jugs and Speed at Coney Island. I saw Bringing Out the Dead, and as different as I thought it was and unique, I said if I ever worked with a partner like that, he would never be going home at night. They would find his body somewhere. Okay. I have not ever worked with anyone even close to the emotional problems that are portrayed in most of these movies. I have managed to have the cream of the crop in partners for my entire career. And I am very thankful for it. And it's one of the reasons that I've lasted. So, no. All right. There's another movie that's coming out now, I understand. And I've seen a little trailer for that. And I go, no, at least I don't have to waste the money going. So,
I don't blame you. It's very hard for them to get it right. Even the cop movies and the fire department, there's movies or TV shows, very few of them actually come close to the real thing. Oh, and by the way, Dave, Adam mentions, because I mentioned I wanted to do a shift up to 5s on A shift. Adam mentions it doesn't count unless you're up there. So the next time I go up to 5s on A shift, you better be there, my friend. And good to see you in the chat, as always. And hello to Andy McCracken. I missed you earlier. Good to see you in the chat as well. Glad that you're watching tonight. Mark Peck's our guest for Volume 70 of the Best and the Bravest Interviews with the FDNY's Elite. Now, before we continue with anything, we had a couple pictures here that we haven't really shown yet, except for Medic 385 earlier. We'll go through them, get the context behind them just for ha-has here and paint the history. So whichever one you want to pull up, Producer Victor, go right ahead. And we'll start with this one. Give us the backstory.
Okay. I ended up getting involved in EMS history. And that has become probably my primary hobby at this point, other than my dog. We had one of our station members, he came in one day, one of our EMTs, and he found this photo of a horse-drawn Coney Island ambulance. Goes back to the 1800s, all right? And I started looking at that, and I started thinking, if this is out there, there's got to be more. And for the next couple of years, I actively started looking. I went down to the main Brooklyn Public Library, using their microfilm system and looking up stuff. I went, I started to get in with the people that had our museum, which was still very young, at our training academy, and looking at what they did. And I just started following this, and I just kept growing and growing and growing more. And finally, I had enough material to put together to build a history display in our crew lounge at Coney Island of the history of the hospital and of EMS in Brooklyn. Developed my own website on that, and it's still up there. And I just kept going from there, and I've been doing it ever since. I still am associated with the New York City EMS Museum. I've developed a lot of leads for them, gotten a lot of equipment that I've discovered on things like eBay and people that I've known. And we even found an old Coney Island ambulance sign, probably from the 30s, which took me 16 years to acquire for them. So this has become my second love. So with that, as my retirement was approaching, I decided I'm going to take all of this material, put it together in a book for the hospital and for the station, so that all this stuff that I've managed to research doesn't die with me. So this was a timeline. This was part of the book that I wrote of major events for the hospital, and it essentially tracks our status as we went from horses to the red and white.
Yeah. from all the way in the beginning of 1873,
Yeah.
ultimately to the merger, as we've been talking about for the last few minutes, on
Yep.
March 17th of 1996. What other pictures have we got here?
Okay, that was the cover for it. And that's the sign that I'm talking about. That sign came to my attention through the administration of Coney Island Hospital. They had someone who who sent them a letter who has that sign. It seems that he was a firefighter, I think, back then, at a station that used to be down by North Brooklyn, by the Brooklyn Bridge area. What's the area that they rebuilt over? It took it all away. Well, anyway, they demolished the station, and he found this in the station. So he wrote to Coney Island, do you have any pictures of an ambulance this might have come from? So they handed it to me, and I started researching it. And I didn't have an exact match, but that style of sign was used on both the horse-drawn and the early gas ambulances. So it took him a number of contacts going on into following his death before I finally got them to agree to give that sign, and it's in the EMS museum now. So
was it Dumbo?
Not Dumbo. Oh, I'm just trying to think.
Somebody in the chat will probably.
No, it'll come to me afterwards. Okay, and that's the first generation. No, that's the second generation of the display I made. So you've got articles of Brooklyn Eagle tracking how the hospital was initially built in 1910, what the vehicles there looked like, and then what the ambulances looked like, going from the horse-drawn up to the bread boxes, the metros, and then finally ending with, I think that was my ambulance at Coney Island in 98 probably, around for that ambulance.
Looks like it. Yeah, I see that picture in the.
Yeah, that's the first version of it.
Yep.
Less material, a different mounting system.
Yeah.
But people appreciated it. So.
Why wouldn't they? Yeah, it paints the picture of how we got the current chapter. As a history buff, I love it. Now we got this one.
Okay, that got me into the Facebook days.
Yeah.
I finally put together a profile photo of the first photo of me in EMS and the last photo of me. For my very last shift, I wore the old uniform, the old shield, and nobody said boo to me about this is a problem. And I went out there and I did my night shift. And it was unusually quiet as well. So I got to say goodbye to a lot of people around the hospital that I knew. But yeah, a little wait. Okay, this is the last incarnation of it, where we have even more material, the book, and just before I retired. And the gentleman to my right is one of the carpenters at the hospital who was there for a long time, who I found out also shared an interest in the history of the hospital. So he gave me some of the material he had, and I instead presented him with a book of all of it put together. He's now retired, I understand, and I think living in Florida. But yeah, he even had a brick that he gave me of when they tore down one of the buildings that I had been part of. And it's just the progress of the hospital. You know, the older ambulance station that I didn't even know was the old ambulance station. It was a methadone clinic at the time that I was beginning at Coney Island, stood next door to it. And it wasn't until we found a photo of these 1940 ambulances that we realized that was the first station they built. So who knew?
Yeah.
Who knew?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love those connectors there. Then when you sent this over, I audibly laughed. This was a great one. You got the story behind this one.
Yes. All right. Yeah. One of my partners, one of his family members brought this to an artist, and they decided to do me as the dinosaur medic, as the true dinosaur medic. During my last years, I was the most senior in title in the paramedic title. So it resulted in me not only getting the very first FDNY shield when they issued them, but it got me this as well. So they took all the joking of Dynomedic, and there I was, reporting for my shift.
That was the best of all right there. And then, of course, that is one of the early ambulances after the merger in front of Truck 4 and 54 engine in Midtown Manhattan. Never missed a performance is the motto of that station.
Yeah,
certainly the same is true.
Vehicles where they took the orange stripe away and just painted it over.
Yep, essentially, it was the same thing they did with the transit police and housing police cars. You just transit was easier because the color scheme was already blue.
I don't blame them at all. I mean, these were vehicles that still have life left in them.
Use them for as long as you could in late 90s.
It took a little bit of attitude adjustment to get used to the merger, particularly because of all the problems that went with the early days. It's not what it was when I left.
Yeah.
I think people were much more in tune with it by that point.
Well, yeah, it makes sense. Even Mike Granton finished his career in the New York City Police Department, as we'll talk about when he comes on the show next month, which he mentions NYPD would have been a giant mistake for pre-hospital care because the NYPD was worse than health hospital care. And listen, if there's ever a show that loves the NYPD, it's the Mike the New Haven podcast.
We probably would have had similar growing pains at that point. Yeah. Well, at least we had emergency service and their experience and their practices as a joining point for us.
Right, because most of the guys in emergency service, well, all the guys, to be correct, all the guys in emergency service are trained as EMTs. Some of the guys in ESU are also medics. So if they go on the call, you're going to get someone trained to your level, if not slightly higher. It's more so the guys and gals and RMPs, rather, that are going around on patrol. Some of them may be trained in that regard because some of those guys and gals have come from EMS as well. But it's hit and miss. You may get that when an RMP rolls up on a medical. You may not. So it really depends.
But definitely at the station level. I mean, in the early years, we used to sign out police radios. The early years of the medic program.
Heard about that.
That's where it finally got started with the idea, because the Jacoby medics were the first to do it. And they had an amazing relationship with the cops up in the 4-5, where they would actually be called for events or jobs outside of that one precinct. They were available for anywhere in the city at some point for MCIs. But, they started us with that, and it helped because with the dispatch problems of EMS in the early years and the delays, we could hear the job go over on PD and be on our way to a cardiac 5 to 10 minutes easily before EMS dispatched the job. Eventually, that started to improve a lot. Where they didn't have that time lag. And I don't know if it was embarrassment that caused them to do it, or finally they started listening to their own dispatches and programming the computers the way that they did. The early computer programs were not as astute as they are these days. So
again, some things change with time and some things change for the better. In regards to what was mentioned earlier about where they rebuilt, Mitch Stern, is it next to Fort Greene where they demolished the station and rebuilt it?
To Fort Greene? No, the Cumberland station is still there, although it's in a different part of the hospital.
Gotcha.
Woodhull was a new hospital. Yeah, so that was still being built when I worked up there. So.
Gotcha. I did want to move ahead a little bit because, get to 2000, 25 years. 2001, 9/11 happens, changes a lot for FDNY EMS. And then you continue on up until 2005. Now, I wanted to ask, because certain guys are like this, and there's nothing wrong with it. They want to get to the round number. Well, I want to get to 20 years. I want to get to 25, 30, 35, 40, and so on and so forth. When you retired in 05, were you one of those guys, hey, let me do 30 and then I'll leave? Or what was it that made you say in 05, time to go?
I had a lot of contact with people that were retiring over my earlier years, and there wasn't a system for it. There wasn't anything that told me this is the way you got to do it, kid. Everyone went for a different reason. For me, I wasn't sure how long I was going to stay in New York at all, and September 11th was the deciding factor, not for me, but for my wife. She was working in Jersey at that point, and I was at Coney Island. and she'd have to do that commute over the bridge. Now, if you remember in the early days, post 9/11, they would have daily terror alerts, closing of the bridges and stuff, and she would get stuck sometimes not being able to get back to Staten Island to pick up the kids from school if there was a problem. So after a while, she finally started looking at it, and she goes, listen, you've got the years in at this point, because with the new pension that came about with the 25 and out pension, I was at the 30-year mark. So, I mean, I could earn more, I could stay if I wanted to, but she really wanted to get out of New York, and it's probably the first argument that she ever really won of this magnitude. So that's what caused me to retire. And, I still didn't retire. I ended up working in Charlotte, North Carolina for another 10 years and earning a second pension because I still had it in me. I still enjoyed the work. I still physically could do it.
Yeah.
And, they thought I was a valuable commodity with the experience. So
absolutely,
I stayed. Yeah.
You did it for a decade with Mecklenburg EMS, and then, of course, you went over to the Piedmont Medical Center for a few years as well. Again, doing what you love to do. And, I mean, I imagine now it's never going to be really out of your system, especially still being a historian. Mm-hmm. But as far as being out in the field, I imagine that after the 16 years down in the Carolinas and obviously the 30 years in New York, that's 46 years combining the two. So I think it's out of your system by now working the ambulance, I imagine.
Well, it's not out of my system, but it's physically a reality. I've had a number of back injuries over the years. And, I would get through the acute phase of it, and I was fine to go another 5 years.
Right.
I'm at the point now where, I think that I've injured my back more by sitting around than not, because when I left Piedmont, and that was only part-time, I had whittled it down to only doing a couple of days a week. After sitting around doing this, my back finally said, you don't have 3-mile hikes in you anymore. It's time. So here I am. But mentally, it kept me sharp. It really did. I mean, I had an advantage going into those later careers that a lot of people didn't have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a great thing to be a part of. And you were certainly a long time part of it. And Andy McCracken adds, it's not out of your system. It's in your DNA. And Jared Hammond also adds, it's in your blood. It's in your blood. It's true. Never leaves you. Never leaves you. For those of you watching on YouTube, you're seeing a rare appearance on camera by our co-producer, Jax, a.k.a. Morty, who I refer to as such because he looks like Mort from Madagascar. So for those of you wondering who is that, that's my lovely dog nephew who's crashing the podcast. Good evening to you, sir. Like I said, co-producer there alongside producer Victor. So this has been a heck of a conversation. I really do appreciate your time. And again, thanks to all you in the audience tonight. A very active chat between Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube as always, which I appreciate. So the rapid fire, as you know by now from watching the show, 5 hit-and-run questions from me, 5 hit-and-run answers from you. The first one is, you weren't in the station a lot, because not with that call volume. No. But nevertheless, out on the road or even post-shift, favorite place to stop for a bite to eat in the city?
Okay. We had a number of places. We made eating an art. Our shift would usually start with pizza, probably at V&S Pizza down on Emmons Avenue, or if we were closer, Spumoni Gardens. And then we would be planning, well, what's to go after that? If I were working with Bill Gettins, my long-term partner, one of my long-term partners who I was with for 21 years, he liked to stop by and pick up bakery cookies to bring back to the nurses. So that was always a stop on a lot of shifts. And then, of course, when it was time for dinner, we had all of the choices. And, the primary among them were places like Brennan and Carr, Spumoni Gardens. We had our favorite Chinese, New Times, not far from the hospital. And we were known quite well by all of these. And it was nice because if you got a call in the middle, you knew your food would either be packed for you really fast or it would be waiting for you when you come back later. So,
not a bad situation.
You have to make food your priority where you can.
Yeah, I've learned that. Eat. snack as well, especially if you're working at 24. Second question, the rapid fire. Most unforgettable call. It could be an uplifting call. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad
I'm going to give you two. I'm going to try and give you a couple of quick ones. All right. Very, very early. I think it was 1978. And we had just begun the paramedic program at Coney Island. That summer, on my second cardiac arrest, where we got a return of pulses, on a beach call. On arrival, the patient was out on the sand. The lifeguards had him in a vehicle and were bringing him up to the boardwalk. The boardwalk, we now got him from the boardwalk to our ambulance parked right at the base of the boardwalk. And we started working this guy, and we were working him in the street because it had much more room to start an arrest, and you don't want to waste the time of putting him in the truck and all that at this point. And we're looking over, and the top of the boardwalk is just crowded with people. Now, the interesting part was I was working with Davin McGloin, who was from my class, who I knew, and a good part of my early years. And he asked if he could bring one of his friends over, Mitch Stern, to ride as an observer. Mitch was an observer on that call, and he managed to see us get an applause from all these people up there when I said, "We've got a pulse." So that was one. That'll always stick in my memory. That was the second, and I started keeping track of calls like that afterwards. The second one was much, much later. As you know, mandatory overtime became a big part of staffing in the later fire years. And we were mandated for another shift. I was working with Bill Gettins. So again, this is two very senior people. All right, we had two cardiac arrests in our normal shift. We were at the ER, just finishing up a call, and we hear a call across the street from the hospital for another cardiac arrest. We volunteer for the job. We're literally 2 minutes away, up the elevator. It's just the two of us. We start CPR by ourselves. We're waiting for our BLS backup. Maybe 5 or 6 minutes later, it's not 31 David, our backup, but it's Chief McCracken, who has been patrolling the streets at night. And his aide is one of my former partners, Pauline. They are now doing CPR. We get this guy back, and the BLS arrives, and now we're switching off with them and managing to get a little more done. This guy was in and out of refractory VFib about 8 times. We'd get him, we'd lose him, we'd get him, we'd lose him. We start packaging him for transport, we've got him, he goes back out. And after doing this about 8 times, we finally decided we're on the last drug that we can give him. All right. We're going to transport him. We're not going to give up on this guy. He still has something in him that wants to get out. So we put him in the ambulance after having to stand him up in the elevator because we were, I think, on the 6th or the 8th floor. Get him down there. He's got the last drug that we can give that'll counteract VTAC. Still hasn't. Start out the transport across the street. And as I'm pulling into the ambulance bay, Bill goes, "He's got a pulse again." All right. He managed to maintain the pulse with the mag sulfate, and he went on to be a 20-year survivor.
Wow.
All right. EMS began a practice a little after that of, we called it the second chance breakfast, where they would bring arrest survivors together with the crews, the physician who was medical control that night, and I got to meet his family at this particular first saves dinner and breakfast, and he stayed around. We stayed in touch. All right, we emailed each other. He would contact me on what he called his rebirth day. He outlived his wife, who ultimately passed away, and I got to meet his kids, who his grandkids never would have known had it not been for us. So you look at that, and to me, I still get emotional with it. But this is why we're in the business we're doing. All right, we've got 3 generations that never would have known this guy had we not been there that night. Had all of us not been there that night. And you can't do better than that. So he made us work for our money. And like I said, we stayed in touch. So he did very well. And that's what I got to tell you about the memorable calls. So,
that's one of the better ones I've heard, and that's the highlight of the show right there. I love that. And Kraken adds via Facebook. See if I can find the comment here. There it is. Says, I'll never forget the cop's comment. Said they'll never see that in our job. A 3-star chief doing CPR.
Well, I knew Andy McCracken since we were in communications together. So it was not, I never feared, number one, I never feared any of the chiefs, but some of them were a little more intimidating. With him, we had a very good relationship. And I got to do a lot of things in equipment and in training because of him. He was a very good addition to Chief of EMS, I got to tell you. So.
Well, Chief McCracken, you should come on the show. You've made enough appearances in the chat, which I'm grateful for, because you've added some nuggets that are really cool to see. That you should come on down as well, and we'll feature you for the best of the bravest, my friend. So hopefully we can make that happen.
Never would have gotten down on their knees, and he was down there before I said anything.
Now listen, you respect that. Guys that never forget where they came from, get right there, right in the trenches, and go to work. Across FD
communications as well.
Yeah. Across FD, PD, and EMS. If you got a boss like that, you'll never go wrong. Third question, the rapid fire. Funniest moment during your EMS years, Coney Island, FDNY, or NYC, or otherwise?
Okay, this is going to be a little bit on the bizarre side.
That's fine.
But if you have to make a title for this episode, it would be Penis in a Jar. Okay.
Song by Tool.
All right. So one of the things that I was doing, one of our chiefs, Gus Pappas, I had known also from my days in communication. And Gus ended up going on through all the years and being the training chief and stuff at the academy. But we stayed in touch, and he always wanted to go out and do more ride time. Well, he had to do it undercover because the administration would not let him go ride on medic crews because of the inherent risks of him getting involved in something that was untoward. But he trusted us enough. He knew me for a long time. So he would go undercover and ride with us as an observer and as a participant if he wanted. So we get one call for what came across was a castration. So I'm working with my partner, Debbie Cianciato, who incidentally is the Jugs of the Mother Jugs and Speed trilogy. A very easy on the eyes young lady, but a fantastic partner. And her husband also happened to be a firefighter. All right, so Gus and him are at the door. I'm laying back a little bit. The door opens up, and there's this guy wearing a white robe with a blood splotch on his crotch. We go into the room, and we're trying to figure out what happened. And his story was he wanted to be made a female. The doctors wouldn't do it for him. I did it myself. He cut off his member. So now, luckily, he was still bleeding, but he was controllable. So I left Gus and Debbie to take care of the initial evaluation. He obviously had mentation, so we weren't too worried about that. And I went on the search for the missing member. He says, it's in the other room in a black bag. And I go to this room, and it's like I just entered the Twilight Zone. There's no lights. There are wires strung across the ceiling from one to the other, to the other, to the... I'm with a flashlight, and I'm looking for this bag. And this gentleman obviously had some serious emotional history. I find the bag. I open it up just on the off chance they can do something with this. And there it is, the penis in the jar. So I bring it back and we transport it with him. But yeah, it had been too long and not something they could give him back. So penis in the jar.
Well, there you go.
Yep.
Yeah, if good thing the title of this episode is Best of the Bravest, because I'm not sure YouTube would prove that one. Nevertheless.
Yeah.
Nevertheless.
He was a very good survivor, though. He did not pass because of this incident. I don't know the rest of the story, but
well, at least he made it through the night. Yeah, you did your part for sure.
Yep.
Well, he lost his part, but that's a different story for a different day. The fourth question is the rapid fire: most meaningful teaching moment or student success story. We talked about that earlier. You can expand on it here.
Okay, I mean that was a good one, but I think that it didn't really start to hit me until I started to see so many of the people that I precepted graduating. I was involved in some of the training up at Jacoby right after we graduated, so there were people in that class that I knew, and it just went on and on. But the point where it really became apparent, people that I never even remembered that rode on my bus during their, the initial preceptor period, doing their field rotations, the number of thank yous I got when I retired on Facebook was immense. And that's where I realized I really impacted a lot more people than I ever thought I did, because some of these are really the stars of the system. And I thought that made me feel really good.
As it should.
Yeah.
As it should. And the last question, rapid fire: one piece of advice for today's paramedics and EMS leaders.
Okay, I'm going to give you two things. The first of which is get in tight with your partners. Your partners make or break the job. All right. And if you work with someone that you really mesh well with, try not to leave him. One of my partners, Bill Gettins, was with me for 21 years. All right. And it was at the point, we were the senior team in the city, from what I'm told. But, we didn't have to ask each other, what do you want to do? What do the other women do? But it was also good for the students that we had, because on every day that they came in during their first 6 months, they had a senior guy who could teach them. So my advice is you got to find the mentors that you want and make the best of them. And the other thing that I would also tell you is what also paid for me. All right. Don't shit on your first responders. They are also a very valuable commodity. And like I said, when in the early days of Coney, I had the captain who would come up to me and said, whatever you need, just tell me. We're not going to do this for the other guys, but, you always do the right thing. And that carried over into my years in Charlotte. We used to be based in their firehouses. So we would go through, multiple firehouses, and they were our first responders. There was no BLS to call if you had a cardiac arrest. They were it. And if you needed help in transporting, you had to take a firefighter with you. And I made a point of it. Even as being an elder person during these years, the young guys or the rookies in the company would be assigned to go carry our equipment. And I said, okay, that's fine. But I never leave the scene without me carrying something or going empty-handed if you're carrying my equipment. All right? I appreciate your assistance, but you're not here to do my job. All right? You're here to help me, and I'm here to help you. And that's the kind of attitude you've got to form between the people that you work with. And it's probably there a lot more. I know these new guys interact a lot more with their first responders. So that's my best advice to you.
And it's good advice. And I appreciate it. This has been fantastic. I thought this would be very good, and I was not disappointed. But don't sign off yet. We'll talk off the air. Before I say goodbye to the audience, a lot of which features familiar faces for you and I. Any shout-outs to anyone or anything you'd like to give?
I don't know. Davin McGloin. All right. He left New York City EMS long before the fire department merger years. And we've managed to get back together again. He has been working at Presbyterian's hospital system since then. And he has finally surpassed me in who is the senior paramedic in the city of New York.
Well, somebody had to.
He still is out there doing his thing. And everyone that I talk to, he is still doing what I should be doing today. All right. Being a mentor to others. And I got to tell you, Davin, I was so glad to see you at Spumoni Gardens. So,
shout out to Davin. Records are made to be broken, Mark. You couldn't hold the title forever. Somebody had to break that record eventually.
No, but eventually.
It did stand for a while, though, which is nice and a testament to the career that you had. Like I said, this was very fun, and I appreciate you making the time. Stick around. We'll talk off the air. And shout out, as always, to everybody in the chat that tuned in, whether you tuned in via LinkedIn, whether you tuned in via Facebook, or whether you tuned in via YouTube. And obviously, as always, those of you who are going to listen to this later on the audio side, wherever it is that you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, so on and so forth. Coming up next on the Mike DeWaven podcast, he was an NYPD lieutenant who, upon his retirement, has ventured into the world of podcasting himself, and that is John McCary, who had a distinguished close to 20-year career with the NYPD, and now is one half of the Finest and Filtered podcast. We previously had his partner on the show, Eric Dim, on the show a while ago, so now we'll get John on. Looking forward to that. And next Friday, she was a CIA intelligence analyst during the height of the CIA's war on terror in the 90s, and some interesting world developments that were happening then, specifically in that role from 1991 until 2002. And she'll join me to talk about it. That's Kim Woodward. So very much looking forward to those two shows on tap as we get back into the law enforcement side here on the Mike DeWaven podcast. Thanks as always for those of you tuning in. For those of you listening on the audio side, for tonight's outro song from their 1991 album, Bad Motorfinger, Soundgarden comes your way with Room 1,000 Years Wide. In the meantime, on behalf of Mark Peck and producer Victor, and of course Jax, who made a special guest appearance tonight, my dog nephew, of course, I'm Mike Colón. This has been Volume 70, the best, the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite, and we will see you next time. Take care. Have a great weekend.